Hello and welcome to our 5 minutes with Ekaterina war vlog about Dnipro, the central Ukraine. I was waiting and didn't record the video because I wanted to see how the situation is changing, and I had some great hopes that it is going to change for the better in terms of the surrounding areas and in terms of Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions. But then I realized that I'm just waiting and waiting and waiting, and the situation is not changing, and or at least it's not changing in the direction that I would like it to change, and that I need to go back to you and give you some updates of what's happening. Let's start with the obvious things. It is November in Ukraine, and November is the time when we have some weather changes. It is starting to be colder, and we also change the clocks 1 hour earlier, so the evening time, the dark time is also starting earlier. And that means that people are more reliant on the electricity, they're more reliant on the heating, and the heating season should have started a week ago, but it didn't, and it was something that the government communicated well in advance, because the idea is that despite Ukraine was preparing for this heating season, Russians were destroying, damaging with the help of the rockets a lot of gas distributing stations, and because these gas distributing stations they cannot provide the gas for the population, despite there is a storage, and the storage is pretty much provided for the whole winter. But if you cannot pump it out of the storage and bring it to people's houses, it means that you don't have enough capabilities to heat over the winter. That's why the government said that the heating season will start as late as possible. And at the moment when I'm recording this video, the centralized heating is not working. And when I'm saying centralized heating, if you live abroad, probably you don't know the system, but the majority of the houses in Dnipro, they are specifically high-rise buildings. It can be 9 or 12-storied of the Soviet times, and they in Soviet times they used to have the centralized heating when for approximately 10 of such houses there will be the boiler station, and these boiler stations with the help of the pipes going to the houses will be providing heating for every place. And in turn, the boiling stations, they were either provided by coal or they were provided by the natural gas, depending on the station itself. And I had a friend over summer in Dnipro, and he was very wondering, and he didn't understand why he will have that many pipes, because they used to be underground, and they started to become obsolete, and now they are overground, and you can see them when you're going around the streets. And he was wondering why we need them, and he was saying it's very inefficient way to heat places. But if you think about the number, and if you think that the whole house has to be heated, not only flats, so the common areas as well, and if you don't do it, the freezing temperatures in winter, they will damage the house infrastructure. At some point that had its own sense, and that was justified. That's why the majority of people who live in the old houses, they will still use the system, and they will rely on the centralized heating. It's very difficult if you already have the apartment in such house. It's very difficult to disconnect yourself from the system and to start heat your own apartment. It's a lot of documents, and it's not justified overall. Newer apartments, they're using the individual heating, and they mostly rely on the electric heating. And again, because Russia is going back to damaging the electricity infrastructure, the substations, they bombed Dnipro specifically, they repaired stations, they also bombed it in different places. And since it's a single system and all the system is working It's one unit. If there is disharmony, all houses will have blackouts, and when you have a blackout, your heating system is not working. Even if you're using not electric ones, you will still need to have the pumps that circulate water in your radiators, and these pumps are usually uh, provided by the electricity, so you need the electricity for heating. And that's something that Russians also destroy all the time, and that means that along with the blackouts and along with the absence of the centralized heating from the government, because they want to save these resources as much as possible for the real cold and winter. Because of this, people are not able to heat houses properly right now. It's not a huge problem currently, because without heating or with irregular heating using the air conditioner, for example, because we have inverter ones, for example, in my apartment, I have the inverter one, and my mom has inverter one. That means that they also are able to be set in heating. And if you put them in heating and heat, for example, for 1 hour, 2 hours, you will have the stable temperature of about 18 degrees inside of your apartment, which is very good. I don't think it's bad. And it's not very humid, so you don't have problems with mold or anything. So that's the situation with the energy and heating thing. The weather is getting colder, the blackouts started already, and they're the same as when I told you earlier, the same approach. And thankfully, before I showed you the power banks, I showed you the fairy lights that you can connect to the power banks. I showed you different devices, as for example, the bigger batteries that you can set to charge your laptop, to charge your internet, for example, if you need to work. These devices are very handy now. Everybody who shelved them over summer, they're now getting them out and like just blowing the dust out of it and using again. Because, for example, in Sinelnikova region, where Russians are terribly, terribly damaging everything, because first of all, because they destroy everything they can. But secondly, there is a big train station there, and they hit in the village all the time. And in that village, last week there was 5 days without electricity. So people did not have electricity for 5 days, because that's how badly it was destroyed. In this regard, all these charging devices are helpful. There are mobile charging points where you can go, and there will be the generator, the diesel generator, and you will be able to charge your home devices with the help of this diesel generator. It's not ideal, it's terrible, it's very loud, it smells, but you cannot do anything there, and you do have to use this diesel generators in order to heat. They can be diesel or petrol, but you're using them to charge your devices, to get access to some light, and if you have your private house, you can put the generator in the yard, and that's how people survive right now, this blackout. The length of them depend. The longest it was in Sinelnikova for 5 days, and in Dnipro it's usually a few hours, no more than few hours, and in some places there are houses that have the electricity all the time. I cannot tell you how exactly it works, but there are people with electricity there. The other thing that we need to talk, and that's a very depressive thing, is the advance of the Russian army. I was telling you before that Pokrovsk is in Ukrainian hands, and it is still the fact now, and there is an agglomeration of or junction of two towns. The first one is Pokrovsk, and the second one is Mirnograd. And in both towns, the Ukrainian army is still fighting, but the fights are very severe, because in order to get to the position, in order to bring whatever you need to bring in the town, the munitions, the first aid, in order to evacuate people, you have 50-50 chances to survive for the specific transportation, because you cannot bring things there in vehicles. The whole area is surveyed with Russian drones, shorter drones, not these big drones, because there is a confusion when we say there was a drone attack in Ukrainian infrastructure, and now I'm telling there was drones that are preventing people from bringing things to the positions. That I mean in different kind of drones. When we are talking about drone attack, we are talking about the huge bombs, and they usually like about up to probably 50 kilograms, maybe a bit more, a bit less. I'm not an expert, but they're carriers of the explosive, big carriers of the explosiveness. So this is the type of bombing drones. They're like Iranian Shaheds that Russians call Gerani and pretend that it's theirs. But when we are talking about the specific drones that Russians use in those ground operations, we are talking about smaller drones of the Mavic type, and now they use the cables, the optic cables, in order to navigate them. And if you have this cable, you can't use the anti-drone radio systems because they are not operated with the radio. And these cable drones, they are a big threat because they used both for surveillance as eyes, so-called, and they are also used as smaller bombers, and they carry the shorter mines or smaller mines, and they can also carry grenades, for example. So these smaller drones, they follow the main roads to and from Pokrovsk and to and from Myrnograd, because it's basically one road. And in order to bring bring munition, you will need to go on foot up to 15 kilometers, which is impossible when you have some heavy load, but you cannot use the car. And it is the truth about other positions, and um, soldiers who are deployed there. They say that the biggest risk is actually when you're getting on the position or getting out of the position, because you might be easily killed by these drones, and the cars are suffering all the time. People are dying in the cars because of this, and that's something that so far is not solvable. And the fights for Pokrovsk and the fights for Myrnograd, they are very difficult, and there are more and more information that it might be not just lost, but it also might be lost with our soldiers inside, that it can be the military catastrophe unless there will be something done, and done fast. But it is not clear what exactly can be done at this point, because obviously the commandment wouldn't talk to us, to civilians, and explain the situation, and everything we know, we just know from the rumors and from the news that we are able to read. But the situation there is very difficult, and usually in the reports they will say difficult but controllable. I don't know if it's controllable, honestly. I just know that it's very difficult, and it's not clear how exactly the situation will develop. But so far, it is not developing in the proper direction. In case if Pokrovsk will be lost for us, the Russian army will receive the very good position to attack more of Dnipro region. And as I told you before, the significant number of villages in Dnipro region itself, they're already occupied. And when I'm saying villages are occupied, I'm saying that they're occupied the territory-wise, because I saw the drone surveillance, and you can see it, it's not a secret, you can see it online. And it shows just the ruins. And when Russians are taking them, there wouldn't be a single standing house in the whole village, because those villages are pretty small. And that means that they're taking territory, and people are usually not there. Usually people are evacuated. At least that's how the process is organized now. If before there were people who remained in Donbas region, specifically in Donetsk areas, there would be the number of populations that will stay here, and some of them are supporters of the Russian army, for example. Some just say that they don't have anywhere to go, which is not particularly true, but some say that they want to die in their houses, especially older people. And if we talk about the bigger Donetsk region, villages and towns, people would stay there. In Dnipro region, according to my knowledge, everybody are choosing to evacuate, specifically because the villages are smaller and they are destroyed more severely. There is no place to hide there. You will be killed, like you will have very slim chances to survive. And also because the Dnipro region, we already seen what Russians are doing with the occupied population, and people just don't want to stay there. And going to this treatment of the occupied population, lately, literally this week, Russians signed some document and proclaimed the occupied territories as the southern military territory of the Russian army. And because it's the southern military territory, that means that all men in the age between 18 and 55, all Ukrainian men who remained under the occupation, have to be conscripted to the Russian army. This is called the compulsory mobilization, and this is something that happened before only in Donetsk and Luhansk regions that were occupied in 2014, and now we have the same in the occupied areas of newly occupied regions, the parts of the Zaporizhia region, for example, which is bordering our region. And this is very worrying because some people did not evacuate because they have elderly relatives to care about, and it was logistically impossible because when the first occupation happened, in order to get to Ukraine, you will need to travel long distance, and you will need to go firstly through Moscow, then to St. Petersburg, and then to one of the Baltic states, and then to Poland, and then to the Western Ukraine, and then to some non-occupied place in Ukraine. And that means that if you have the elderly who cannot, not mobile, who cannot move easily, or people with special needs, logistically it was impossible to do. And some people, they just remained in their houses. It's something happened in Crimea, including there was a Ukrainian scientist there, and he remained in Crimea because he had to care of his old mother, and he was still positioning himself as a Ukrainian scientist, and Russians arrested him this year, and they said that he is collaborating with the enemy, meaning that he is working for Ukraine, and now he is not able to care about his mother, and he is in Russian prison. And that's something that shows the situation in which some men would found themselves, and they are now in a very difficult position because they won't be able to move from this area, they won't be able to go back to Ukraine now, and probably they still have this elderly relatives that they have to care about, and they don't like Russians, they never wanted to be the part of this Russian army, and they will be forcibly conscripted from these regions. And this brings us to the place where I told you that in the case of the occupation of more regions, Russia will use the population of this region for the kind of enlarging its army, and if Ukraine will be occupied, Russia will be able to enlarge its army significantly and attack Europe with the help of non-willing to fight Ukrainians. But Russian army has a very good, like good in a bad way, experience in forcing people to fight. They have a lot of prisoners or ex-prisoners who are serving in the army, and they have the system of the people behind you. If you will go back, they will kill you. If you refuse to do what they want to do, and usually it's just the mid-storms when wave after wave people will die, taking some one position, for example, and they can easily kill 50 of their own soldiers just to get to one Ukrainian position, which was held by 5 soldiers, and for Russians it's something normal. That's how they're winning the war, and it's not something that I'm saying just to scare you or exaggerate it. It's a fact, and that's the strategy, that's the organizational management of Russian army, and it means that it will absorb Ukrainian people, and it will force them to fight with no willing, with no experience, just for these mid storms. And that's something that regretfully is happening right now in the occupied areas of Ukraine. So Russians are not only killing pro-Ukrainian population, torturing pro-Ukrainian population, regardless of their age and gender, but also they recruit specifically men indiscriminately to serve in the Russian army as this kind of meat, as people who will with their bodies lay down the grounds for the stone brigades, for the more experienced descent brigades of the Russian army. That's what's happening there, and none of these developments, as you might imagine, is good for Ukraine. The only positive thing for these few weeks that I can tell you is that Ukrainian drones, bigger drones, the ones that carry the explosives long distance, they were able to hit more and more objects inside of Russia, deeper in the Russian territory. And this is the development that is obviously gaining momentum. And it is something that, according to the news and according to the information that we read in press, will be repeated, it will be scaled, and Russians, they won't be able to defend all the sky because the territory is very big, and it is basically impossible. That's the good developments there. There are some good developments in terms of reaching the objects in occupied Crimea, the Russian military bases there. And there are some very worrying developments in terms of the Russian preparation to invade other countries, because they continue surveillance in other countries, they continue spying in Europe, and the European countries, they're trying to prepare better, but it's not enough. It's definitely not enough preparation. And as the Ukrainian having very deep, good connections in Europe, having friends abroad, I don't want this war to go out from Ukraine. I would like to stop it in Ukraine, bring it back to the territory of Russia if they would be willing to fight, and to stop Russians in the border with Ukraine, not even inside of Ukraine. But it seems that European idea now that while Russia is busy in Ukraine, Europe has some time to prepare, and that's why Europe is not very interested in stopping or in helping to fight Russia effectively, to literally kick them out of our country. That's how it seems from inside. Maybe from outside you think it's different. Please leave a comment below this video. Talk to me about what you think. But the diplomatic developments there are good in terms of the military cooperation. Europe is more coordinated. We receive more weapons from Europe, but at the same time, the reaction is not firm enough. Looking at what's happening on the ground, looking at the military actions in Pokrovsk, in Mirnograd, looking at what's happening in Zaporizhzhia, it's very dangerous situation there as well, because Russians are advancing there, or at least trying to advance. As they did not stop, I was thinking that after summer campaign, the autumn campaign will be the Ukrainian counter-offensive and the stop of Russian offensive. But Russian offensive, it quietened a little bit in September, and now it's started with the new impulse and is gaining more momentum. So we were not in the position when we stopped the autumn invasion, the stop of autumn operation of the Russian army yet. That's it for today. That's how it develops. I hope I answered some of your questions about the ground situation. There is still enough water, there is still enough food in the city. The same situation with employment, so there are some things that are not changing in the good way, but there are also some very, very dangerous developments. So that's it for today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for your love. And please do keep supporting Ukraine. I hope to see you very soon under way better circumstances. Goodbye for now.